It is the Halloween special on BCFE FM, and what better way to get in the scary mood than to read the tales of Irish folklore. I'll start off with something that will ease you into this spooky special, and it all begins in Mayo. About 2 miles west of the village of Cong in County Mayo, there is a cave known as Pigeon Hole, or Pull na Gulum in Irish. Once inside the cave, you'll be struck by its size and the river running through it, which at times could be mistaken for the cry of the banshee. The walls are covered with bushes and ivy, and this is where the pigeons nest, which is what gave the cave its name. The legend of the fairy trout concerns 2 young lovers who are engaged to be married. One night the young man was ambushed and murdered, and his body was thrown into a nearby lake. The young girl was heartbroken because he meant the world to her, and she fell into a deep depression, slowly pining away. Eventually she wandered off and was never seen again. Some say she was taken by the fairies. Shortly after her disappearance, a white trout appeared in the local lake. People had never seen such an unusual fish, and soon rumours began to spread about the fairy fish. In Ireland, the belief in fairies was very strong at the time, and superstition was rife, so the fairy fish was given the greatest respect because it wouldn't do to upset the little people, as the fairy folk were called. As the years passed on, the people never bothered the trout, and it lived quite happily, doing whatever it is that fish do, until one day, a soldier heard the story of the white trout and decided to catch it and eat it. Eventually he caught the fish and took it back to his house, where he attempted to cook it, and he soon realised that this was no ordinary fish, because no matter what he did, it would just not cook. He flipped it from side to side and tossed it over and over in the frying pan, but to no avail, and the soldier wasn't going to be beaten by a fish, so he decided to eat it anyway. He put it onto a plate, and just as his knife touched the skin of the fish, it let out a scream, jumped off the plate and fell to the floor. The soldier stood, mouth agape, as the fish transformed into a beautiful young woman. Holding out her arm, she pointed to where the soldier's knife had cut her skin. She spoke to him and told him that she was awaiting for her one true love to return. She demanded that he give up his evil ways and return her to the lake. The soldier was shocked and shaking with fright. He told the woman that he was very sorry and that he would renounce his wicked ways. But how could he take a beautiful woman back to a lake and just throw her in? The woman then told him that she would transform back into a fish, and that he could take her to the underground river within the Pigeon Hole, because the river fed to the local lake, so no one would see him and he would be safe. She then transformed back into a white trout, and the soldier quickly picked her up, ran to the Pigeon Hole and placed her in the river. As soon as she entered the water, it turned blood red for a moment as the cut on her skin quickly healed. It is said to this day, at certain times, you may see a white trout swimming in the lake or the river deep within the Pigeon Hole. Look closely and you'll see a red mark upon its side. Some people say it's the mark of a knife cut, and some say it's where she was burned in the soldier's frying pan. As for the soldier, well, he changed his ways and never ate fish again. I told you I'd start you off with something to ease you into the spooky special. But now it's time for the real stuff. I went into the dusty, creepy library of old folklore manuscripts to visit a friend of mine who is an expert of Irish folklore.
Traditionally, often you'd find, say, that the fairies had an abhorrence to blood. There is a biblical interpretation that they were fallen angels that were on the side of Lucifer when he rebelled against God, that they then were being sent to hell by God, and that God then repented, or relented at least, and said, right, leave them where they are. If they're in the air, they'll be in the air. If they're on the land, they'll be in the land. If they're in the water, they'll be in the water. That they're just on their way to hell. He kind of stopped their journey. So they became this wandering kind of group in between two worlds, who are the fairies, basically. That was a kind of medieval biblical interpretation of them. But as part of that, it was understood that they didn't have a drop of blood in them, and that to get into heaven, they'd need a drop of blood. And if they didn't have that, they'd be doomed to kind of be in this kind of eternal limbo, basically. Sometimes at dusk, when there's a change from day to night, that's when the supernatural kind of manifests, basically. So there are sometimes mixed up as though with the local dead. Sometimes, say, somebody wandering around after going out on a social call, coming home at night, we'll see a funeral, and he realised that there's dead people in the funeral cortege, and he's at a fairy funeral. Their affairs mimic the affairs of the living. They're conceived of in this multitude of ways. Generally, kind of to be quite dangerous. They can help you, they can hinder you, but it's a way to often interpret and kind of dictate human behaviour with reference to this kind of other group. So sometimes they're mixed up with the dead, sometimes they appear as kind of normal people, sometimes they appear as very small people, sometimes as very tall people. Then you also have within that the idea of kind of specific individuals who belong to the fairy host but only appear as individual characters. So in that regard you would have most famously the leprechaun, who's become a kind of an American Irish stereotype, but has a solid basis all over the country in tradition. The Lutheradan, they have all these kind of different ideas as this trickster figure. Same with the banshee. The banshee is a kind of death harbinger who screams and wails as an omen of death. You never get a story where kind of a banshee, a leprechaun, and the fairies go into a bar. They're all, when they exist separately in their own narrative streams, so they're conceived of in quite a kind of broad sweeps, basically, as being dangerous but not malevolent, and sometimes abducting men, women, children, and bringing them away to the other world. There's a story from Wicklow that I remember reading where some farmer decides to go and plough a fairy fort in his land. And the fairy fort was typically a mound of earth that was believed to have looked like it was being built by human hands, but no one really, it was just there forever. No one really knew kind of who had built it or what these remains were. It was typically seen that the fairies lived in that under the ground, basically. If you have a field and there's a fairy fort on it, it kind of means you have less arable land. You can't plough that area of the field. So certain farmers, we're told, is kind of popular narrative and tradition, would plough the fairy fort. They just destroy it and render the ground flat so they could have that extra bit of land to farm. But consistently the narrative will say somebody begins to plough it, even taking sticks from it to make a fire, will have some sort of, it's a taboo, there'll be a retribution, basically. So one man, for example, is out, he starts to plough the fairy fort, and his wife comes out to him with his dinner, and he's delighted and he eats the dinner, and she goes back in across the fields back in home, and then a few minutes later she comes out again with the dinner, and he's like, what are you doing here with the dinner? Why are you out to feed me? And she's like, I didn't come out at all, it wasn't her. And he realises the food that he's eaten is this kind of supernatural poisonous food, and he's kaput, basically he dies. And then, you know, it's never enough for even the farmer to die. He dies, his house falls to ruin, his family dies, his livestock die, everything is kind of destroyed. So the prescription in the wider sense, in the communal sense, is don't touch or interfere with fairy forts. It was a sign of honour almost that that banshee would follow your family. She said to follow certain families. She said to follow the old noble families. So anybody with a surname of Max or O's she would follow those apparently noble families, basically. And she would be heard in the district crying uncontrollably and screaming before someone in that family died. So that might be met with terror, or it might be met with fright, but there wasn't the general sense that she would you'd see her on the street and she'd attack you. She was generally heard, basically. Okay. But there's a lot of narratives that recite, or that give account of people seeing her, commonly seeing her combing her hair. It's a particularly old idea of the otherworld woman who's often seen combing her hair by a river. These kind of old European notions as well. So you find reference to that. All these things that kind of continued over countless generations. The old ideas that manifest in this death harbinger. So she typically foretells a death, but there might also be a certain sense of pride in that she'd follow a certain family. There's an instance from Kerry where some kind of peasants in this village or whatever are kind of frightened to hear her when they hear her screaming in the area, and she interrupts her lamentations, and they hear her voice kind of booming in, that she to stop their crying and don't be upset, that she doesn't give a shit about these particular, you're not worth her lamentations. Kind of scolds them and then goes back to her screaming and crying, and the next day they hear that such and such a lord up in the hill, the old kind of Gaelic nobility, has died. So she was lamenting this individual. So there's a certain kind of prestige or whatever almost attached to her lamentations. The banshee is related to this old death harbinger, the Morrigan, the Morrigan, the phantom queen, who's part of the panoply of old pre-Christian deities who are often triplicated. There's three of herself. And there's Nemeth, Bow, which is the banshee is called the Bow in Wexford and other areas of the country. Oh. And the Morrigan, the phantom queen. Nemeth means panic. She'd appear on a battlefield and just spread panic by just the sight of her. There's the idea that the banshee or the bow, there's an old word, Catu Budu, an old proto-Celtic word that means battle crow. pretty bloody cool name. And this was a carrion crow who'd feed on the dead bodies after a big battle. And that symbol was kind of understood as a harbinger of death, basically. So in the story about Cuchulainn, when Cuchulainn dies, the supernatural, the hero, the mythic champion of the Ulster cycle, who fights off the armies of Maeve and Alil, the people of Connacht, and protects the Ulster people, you see that famous statue in the GPO of the man tied to the rock, and there's a crow on his shoulder. That's the Maureen, the Phantom Queen, Catu Buddha, and that Buddha is the bow that you find to describe the Banshee in Wexford. So you have these old kind of pre-Christian symbolisms that then find their way all the way down through thousands of years to be understood and sitting in the minds of people in a flat in the inner city, basically, that have that kind of unbroken line.
I think I've scared you enough for one Halloween. Now go and enjoy your night. But try not to bump into any old wailing women on your way home.